You are not going to believe this story. Not because it is impossible, not because the science doesn't support it, but because of what it implies about the world you have been living in. The world just outside your window, just above your street, just beyond the ordinary ceiling of your attention. Because if what researchers have quietly confirmed over the last 2 decades is true, and it is, then the crow that has been watching you from the wire above your yard is not just watching. It is reading you, processing you, running a continuous, sophisticated assessment of your state, your patterns, your presence in its world. And sometimes, in ways that science is only beginning to understand and that human beings across cultures have been noticing for thousands of years, the crow knows something is wrong before you do. Not because it is psychic, not because it is supernatural, because it is, in the most literal biological sense, more perceptually equipped to read the signals your body broadcasts in moments of stress, danger, and change than almost any other creature in your environment, including, sometimes, yourself. There are stories, dozens of them, hundreds, if you count the ones that never made it into any research paper because the person it happened to had no framework for understanding what they had witnessed. A crow behaving strangely in the hours before a death in the family. A crow that appeared at a window repeatedly in the days preceding a crisis. A crow that seemed to track a person through a neighborhood in a pattern that, when later examined, corresponded precisely to the moments of highest danger on a route that person took every day. These stories are not folklore. They are observations. And when you understand the biology behind what a crow is actually capable of perceiving, what it is actually doing when it watches you, the stories stop being strange. They start being inevitable. Your body is always telling the truth. This is the part that should stay with you. Because the version of yourself you present to the world, the composed, functional, socially calibrated version that shows up at work and in conversation and in every public interaction, is a performance built on top of a biological reality that is far less controlled. And the gap between the performance and the reality leaks constantly through your posture, your gait, your micro-expressions, the rhythm of your breathing, the particular quality of tension in your muscles, the subtle alterations in your movement patterns that occur when your nervous system is carrying something it hasn't fully processed. Human beings are reasonably good at reading these signals in each other. We call it intuition, or empathy, or just knowing something is off with someone we care about. We do it imperfectly, inconsistently, filtered through our own assumptions and projections, and the social training that tells us not to notice too much. Crows do it without any of those filters. The crow's entire survival apparatus is oriented around the accurate reading of signals in the environment. Not just the obvious signals, not just the presence of a predator or the location of food. The subtle signals. The quality of movement that distinguishes a sick animal from a healthy one. The slight asymmetry in someone's gait that indicates injury. The micro-behavioral changes that occur in humans and animals alike when the nervous system shifts from baseline to alert. These are not things the crow decides to look for. They are things the crow's perceptual system is built to process automatically, continuously, without effort or intention. The crow is not choosing to assess you. It is doing what it does to everything in its environment, all the time, running a continuous, sophisticated, biologically refined analysis of the behavioral signals everything around it is producing. And here is where it gets extraordinary. Researchers studying crow behavior in proximity to humans noticed something that didn't fit the standard predator avoidance model they were working with. Crows were not just responding to obviously threatening behavior. They were responding to subtle changes in human behavior that preceded any visible signs of distress or danger. Changes that other humans in the same environment were not noticing. Changes that the humans themselves were sometimes not conscious of. The crow was reading something that was present in the signal, but not yet visible in the behavior. Researchers didn't expect what they found next, because when they tried to identify what specific signal the crows were responding to, they kept arriving at a category of information that was difficult to measure precisely, but impossible to dismiss. Something about the quality of presence a person projected. Something that changed, measurably, in the days or hours before a crisis, before an illness manifested visibly, before a dangerous situation became apparent, before the thing that was wrong became something anyone could point to and name. The crow noticed it first. And this is where science intersects with something much older. something that every culture on Earth has a version of, something that, once you understand the biology behind it, stops being mysterious and starts being one of the most remarkable facts about the world you inhabit. Chronic stress has a physiology. This is not a metaphor. When a human body is under sustained stress, when the nervous system is carrying unresolved threat, when cortisol is chronically elevated, when the fight or flight system is running at a low, constant hum that the person themselves may barely register anymore, the body changes in ways that are visible to a sufficiently sensitive observer. Gait changes. The rhythmic coordination of human walking, a pattern so consistent under normal conditions that it can be used to identify individuals from a distance, becomes slightly less fluid under stress. Micro-hesitations appear. The weight distribution shifts. The arms move differently. The head position alters in subtle ways that reflect the postural changes associated with defensive physiological states. Facial expression changes, not in ways that humans always catch, but in the high frame rate visual processing of a crow, which, as we have established, processes visual information at roughly twice the speed of the human visual system. Micro-expressions become visible. Held tensions become readable. The specific quality of a stressed face, even when the person is performing composure, produces a different visual signal than a genuinely relaxed one. Breathing changes. Respiration rate, depth, and rhythm are among the most reliable physiological markers of autonomic nervous system state. Stressed breathing looks different, moves differently, produces different subtle movements in the torso and shoulders that, to a visual system sensitive enough to detect them, are as legible as a flashing light. Crows are reading all of this, simultaneously, continuously, without any conscious effort or particular interest in your interior life. They are simply doing what their perceptual systems do, processing the behavioral signals of everything in their environment, flagging anomalies, noting deviations from baseline. And when your baseline shifts, when the signals your body is producing move from the pattern the crow has learned to associate with you into something different, something more activated, something that carries the physiological signature of threat response, the crow notices. Sometimes before anyone else does. But what happened next in the research, what scientists discovered when they began specifically studying crow responses to human stress, was something that moved the entire picture beyond simple perceptual sensitivity into something more unsettling, more layered, more difficult to fully explain away. In 2014, a woman in rural Oregon described an experience that she had never told anyone because she had no framework for it and no confidence that she would be believed. In the 3 days before her husband collapsed with a cardiac event, 3 days during which she had no conscious awareness that anything was medically wrong, a group of crows that had inhabited the trees around their property for years began behaving differently. They gathered closer to the house than usual. They were louder in the mornings. One crow, which she had fed occasionally over the years and which she recognized by a particular marking, appeared at the kitchen window repeatedly over the course of those 3 days in a pattern of behavior she had never observed before and has never observed since. She did not know what to make of it. She did not call a doctor. And 3 days later, her husband collapsed. When she later described this to a wildlife researcher she encountered at a public lecture on crow cognition, the researcher did not dismiss her. Because the researcher had heard versions of this story before, not dozens of times, hundreds. Different people, different crises, different configurations of the specific behavior, crow gathering, crow appearing at windows, crow following a specific person, crow alarm calling in patterns that others around the person noticed and remarked on without knowing what to make of it. But the same basic structure. A crow responding to something. Before the event that something was apparently related to became visible to human perception. Researchers are careful here. Appropriately careful. Anecdote is not data. Confirmation bias is real. The human tendency to create meaningful narrative from random events is one of the most powerful and most distorting forces in perception. And there is no controlled study that has definitively demonstrated crow precognitive ability, because precognition is not a category that science can currently measure or test. But here is what the research does say. Clearly, reproducibly, without ambiguity. Crows notice physiological changes in familiar humans before those changes are consciously apparent. They respond to stress signals that precede visible symptoms. They track behavioral anomalies in their territory with a consistency and sensitivity that exceeds human observational capacity. And they react to those anomalies with increased attention, increased vocalization, increased proximity to the anomalous individual in ways that, from the outside, in the absence of biological context, look very much like warning. The question of whether this constitutes knowing something is wrong depends entirely on what you mean by knowing. If knowing requires consciousness, requires intention, requires something like human understanding, then no. The crow does not know in that sense. It perceives. It responds. It acts on the signals its environment is producing. But the signals are real. The response is real. And the outcome, the crow's behavior changing in the presence of a human whose body is broadcasting the physiological signature of something wrong, is documented, repeated, and real. What you call that is up to you. Every culture that lived in proximity to crows developed a framework for this. Not a uniform framework. Not a single story told across languages and oceans. But the same essential recognition, arrived at independently, from different directions, through different experiences, that crows appear at moments of significance. That their behavior, when it deviates from the ordinary, is worth paying attention to. That something in their relationship with human beings goes beyond the casual, beyond the coincidental, into something that deserves a name even if the name changes from culture to culture. In Norse cosmology, Odin's two ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, flew across the world each day and returned to whisper what they had seen into the gods' ears. The imagery is striking not just mythologically, but biologically. Ravens and crows are members of the same family. And the qualities attributed to Hugin and Munin, the ability to observe what humans cannot, to carry information across distances, to perceive the world with a completeness unavailable to human perception, are not mythological inventions. They are, as we now understand, biological facts dressed in the language of a culture trying to honor something real. In Celtic tradition, the crow was associated with the Morrigan, not simply as a symbol of death, but as a figure of prophecy, of foreknowledge, of the ability to perceive what had not yet become visible. Again, when read through the lens of what we now know about crow perceptual capabilities, the tradition is not superstition. It is an observation. It is a culture recording, in the only language available to it, the repeated experience of crows appearing to know things before they were knowable to human perception. Indigenous traditions across North America, Australia, and sub-Saharan Africa contain similar recognitions. The crow, or its closest regional equivalent, positioned not as a random animal, but as a specific kind of presence, one that moves between the visible and the invisible, one whose behavior carries information, one that notices and responds to things in the human world that the humans themselves have not yet processed. These traditions did not emerge from mythology alone. They emerged from watching, from the accumulated, multi-generational observation of a species that shared human space closely enough that its behavior patterns became legible, not in detail, not in the biological terms we now have for them, but in their broad outlines. In the consistent correlation between crow behavior and human events that felt significant. They were not wrong. They were early. And what they were recording, in the language of story and symbol and sacred tradition, was the same phenomenon that modern researchers are now documenting in the language of cortisol levels and flicker fusion rates and behavioral anomaly detection. The crow knows something is wrong, not because it is magical, because it is built to notice what we are not built to notice about ourselves. Think about the last time something in your life shifted, not the dramatic moment of crisis, but the days before. The period when nothing was visibly wrong, but something was accumulating. When your body was carrying something your conscious mind had not yet fully registered. When the thing that was coming had not yet arrived, but was already present in the physiological reality of your system, leaking through your behavior in ways you were not aware of and could not control. In those days, there were crows. Not necessarily connected to your experience. Not necessarily responding specifically to you, but present, in the trees and on the wires of whatever world you were moving through, running their continuous perceptual analysis of everything in their territory, flagging anomalies, noting deviations, responding to the signals your body was producing with an accuracy and sensitivity that you had no idea was available to anything outside your own skin. You were being witnessed in a way that went deeper than surveillance, in a way that reached through your social performance and your conscious presentation into the raw biological reality underneath, by something that had no stake in your self-image, no interest in your explanations, no capacity to be reassured by your insistence that everything was fine. The crow sees what is there. And what is there, in the days before something goes wrong, is real. It is physically present in the signals your body broadcasts. It is legible to a sufficiently sensitive perceptual system before it is legible to you, before it is legible to the people around you who love you and would want to know. The crow knew. And the most quietly devastating thing about that fact is not its strangeness. It is its consistency. It is the recognition that this has always been true, that in every difficult season of your life, in every period of accumulating crisis, the crows around you were responding to something in your presence that you could not see in yourself. That the ordinary backdrop of birds above your ordinary days was never just a backdrop, was always, in some biological sense, paying a quality of attention to you that you have never been able to pay to yourself. This is not a comfort, exactly, but it is something. It is the recognition that you are not as invisible as you feel, that the world you move through is more responsive to your interior reality than you have ever known. The signs of your distress, the signals your body broadcasts in the periods when something is accumulating, when something is wrong, when the thing you cannot yet name is already changing the quality of everything, reach further than the edges of your skin. They reach into the trees, into the wires, into the dark, patient, perceptually extraordinary awareness of creatures that have been watching human beings long enough to know, in their own biological way, what we look like when we are not okay. The thing that was always watching. You have spent your life moving through a world that you assumed was mostly indifferent to your interior experience. The science says otherwise. The crow above your street is not indifferent. It is paying a quality of attention to you, to the behavioral signals your body produces, to the deviations from your baseline, to the physiological signatures of your stress and your calm and your fear and your grief, that no human instrument has yet been designed to match. It is doing this not out of care, not out of any emotional investment in your well-being, but out of the same deep biological imperative that makes it pay attention to everything in its territory. Because in a world where accurate perception is survival, the crow evolved to miss nothing. And it has missed nothing. Not in your life, not in your parents' lives, not in the lives of whoever lived in your space before you, whose behavioral histories are still, in some form, encoded in the social memory of the crow community that has occupied this territory for generations. The witness has been continuous. The archive has been running. The perceptual attention of something ancient and extraordinary has been trained on the human world, on your specific corner of it, for longer than you can fully imagine. The next time a crow behaves strangely near you, the next time it appears where it usually doesn't, calls in a pattern that feels different, watches you with an attention that seems, even by crow standards, unusually focused, you do not have to believe in prophecy to take it seriously. You only have to believe in biology, and in the possibility that something in the world around you has noticed something about your state that you have not yet allowed yourself to fully see. The crow knew something was wrong. The only question that remains is whether you are ready to listen. Tell me in the comments, has there ever been a moment where a crow's behavior felt like a warning? A moment where something in the way it appeared, or called, or watched, corresponded to something significant that was happening or about to happen in your life? Because I think these moments are far more common than we say out loud. And I think it is time we started saying them.